The cargo manifest glowed softly in the dim light of Ren Thorne's cramped office, aboard freight station Meridian 7. But his attention had drifted to the viewport where distant stars wheeled slowly past, 25 years old, and he was already settling into the predictable rhythm of shipping schedules and inventory reports. It wasn't the life he'd imagined as a child, dreaming of the wider galaxy while his mother told him bedtime stories about alien worlds. His mother, Nessa Thorne, had been exiled to the research station on Kalos 3 for 15 years now, and Ren still didn't fully understand why. The official reports spoke vaguely of ethical violations and unsuitable research methodology, but they'd never made sense to him. His mother was brilliant, passionate about her work in xenobiology, and had always spoken of alien species with respect and wonder. A soft chime indicated an incoming personal transmission. Ren straightened, hoping it might be from his mother. Their weekly calls were the highlight of his existence. Instead, the holographic projector revealed a figure he'd never seen before, tall, elegant, with the distinctive silver-blue skin and elongated features of a Kytherian. Ren Thorne. The voice carried the musical quality typical of her species, but there was something urgent in her tone. "My name is Ziva. I'm a cultural trader working the Outer Rim routes. I have information about your mother that I believe you need to hear." Ren's pulse quickened. "What kind of information? Is she all right?" Ziva's expression grew serious, her large dark eyes reflecting genuine concern. "She is physically well, but I'm afraid the situation is more complex than you may realize. I've recently gained access to sealed Galactic Harmony Council records through my trading partnerships. What I discovered about her case," she paused, seeming to choose her words carefully, "it's not what the public documents suggest." "I'm listening." Ren leaned forward, his forgotten work scattered across his desk. 23 years ago, your mother was conducting groundbreaking research on interspecies genetic compatibility. Her work suggested that the barriers between species were far less absolute than the Council claimed. She was developing techniques that could allow for true genetic bonding between different alien races, not just reproduction, but actual sharing of traits, abilities, even lifespan. Ren felt a chill run down his spine. "That's impossible. The Council has always maintained that such research is prohibited because it's scientifically impossible." "Exactly." Ziva's image flickered slightly as the transmission encountered interference, but her voice remained clear, "which is why they branded her research as dangerous pseudoscience and had her exiled." But the sealed records tell a different story. 3 weeks before her exile, she successfully created a stable genetic fusion between Terran and Altarian DNA samples. The implications were staggering. The weight of this revelation hit Ren like a physical blow. They exiled her because she succeeded, not because she failed. More than that. Ziva's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Yesterday, the Council formally classified her as genetically unfit for interspecies contact. It's a designation that carries severe legal implications. She's now prohibited from leaving Kalos 3, from communicating with non-human species, and from conducting any research whatsoever. They're essentially making her disappear." Ren stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the metal floor of his office. "That's insane. She's done nothing wrong. Her research could revolutionize our understanding of biology, of what's possible between species." "I agree," Ziva said, "which is why I'm risking my trading licenses to contact you. There are others who believe your mother's work could change the galaxy for the better, but the current Council leadership sees it as a threat to the established order." "What established order?" Ziva's expression grew grim. "Think about it, Ren. What happens to political power structures if species can truly merge? What happens to trade barriers, to territorial disputes, to the whole concept of racial superiority that some Council members still cling to? Your mother's research doesn't just threaten scientific orthodoxy, it threatens the entire foundation of how galactic society is organized." Ren began pacing the small confines of his office, his mind racing. "There has to be something I can do, some way to appeal the decision." "There is," Ziva said carefully, "but it would require you to travel to Nexus Prime, the galactic capital. You'd need to present your case before the full Council. And you'd be going up against some of the most powerful political figures in known space. It would be dangerous, expensive, and your chances of success would be minimal. Ren stopped pacing and looked directly at Ziva's image. Something in his expression must have conveyed his determination, because she smiled a subtle expression that somehow transformed her alien features into something achingly familiar. "You're going to do it anyway, aren't you?" she said. "She's my mother," Ren replied simply. "And if what you're telling me is true, then this isn't just about her anymore. This is about the future of interspecies relations across the galaxy." Ziva nodded approvingly. "I was hoping you'd say that. I have contacts on Nexus Prime who might be able to help. Legal advocates who specialize in challenging council decisions. It won't be easy, but it's possible." "Why are you helping me?" Ren asked. "You don't know me, and this could ruin your trading business." For a moment, Ziva's composed expression cracked, revealing something vulnerable underneath. "Because 20 years ago, the council made a similar ruling about my own family. My parents were from different Cytherian subspecies, and their union was deemed genetically inappropriate. I was classified as a hybrid anomaly and barred from certain professions and social positions. I've spent my entire adult life working around those restrictions." Understanding dawned on Ren's face. "You think my mother's research could change the laws for people like you? I think your mother's research could prove that diversity makes us stronger, not weaker. That the barriers between us are artificial constructs, not natural law." Ziva's voice carried a passion that transcended species boundaries, but only if someone is willing to fight for that truth. Ren looked around his small office, at the mundane cargo reports and shipping schedules that had defined his life until this moment. Then he looked back at Ziva's image, seeing not just an alien trader, but an ally in a cause he was only beginning to understand. "Tell me about these contacts on Nexus Prime," he said, as Ziva began outlining the complex political landscape of the galactic capital. Ren felt something awakening inside him, a sense of purpose that had been dormant for too long. His mother had been branded unworthy by those in power, but he was about to discover that worthiness wasn't determined by committees or councils. Sometimes it was proven by the courage to stand up and fight for what was right, regardless of the odds. The stars outside his viewport suddenly seemed less distant, less cold. They were destinations now, not just points of light, and somewhere among them waited the battle that would determine not just his mother's fate, but the future of love itself across the cosmos. The transport ship Wandering Star was exactly the kind of vessel Ren had expected. When booking passage on a freight hauler's budget, cramped, noisy, and smelling faintly of recycled air and engine coolant. But it was headed to Nexus Prime, and that was all that mattered. He'd liquidated his savings, sold his few possessions, and quit his job at Meridian 7, all within 48 hours of Ziva's revelation. Now, 3 days into the 2-week journey, he was beginning to wonder if righteous anger was sufficient fuel for what he was attempting. First time to the capital, the voice belonged to Captain Jorik, a weathered man whose species Ren couldn't immediately identify. His skin had a faint greenish tint, and his eyes were larger than human normal. But he spoke standard with the easy familiarity of someone who'd spent decades dealing with travelers from across the galaxy. "Yes," Ren replied, looking up from the legal documents he'd been studying. Ziva had provided him with copies of the relevant council protocols, but the language was dense with bureaucratic jargon that made his head spin. Jorik settled into the seat across from him. In the small passenger lounge, advice from someone who's made this run 100 times: don't let the city intimidate you. Nexus Prime's designed to make people feel small, insignificant. All those towering spires and floating platforms, the sheer scale of it. But remember, it's just buildings. The people inside them put their clothes on one appendage at a time, same as everyone else. "Thanks," Ren said, though his attention was still focused on the documents. "Did you know that there are 47 different ways the council can classify someone as unfit for interspecies contact, and most of them are completely subjective? You're going up against a council ruling." Jorik's expression grew serious. "Son, that's not just swimming upstream, that's swimming up a waterfall." Before Ren could respond, another voice cut through their conversation. Actually, there are 53 ways, and 12 of them have been successfully challenged in the past decade. Ren looked up to see a woman standing in the lounge entrance, her arms crossed and an expression of mild exasperation on her face. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back in a practical style, and her features showed the subtle elongation and silver-flecked eyes that marked her as part Altarian. More importantly, she was looking at his legal documents with the kind of professional interest that suggested expertise. "I'm sorry," Ren said. "Were you eavesdropping?" "Hard not to when you're discussing council classifications at full volume," she replied, moving into the lounge. "And when someone's about to make what sounds like a catastrophically uninformed legal challenge." She extended her hand. "Mira Delian, interspecies legal advocate." Ren shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the way her silver-flecked eyes seemed to catalog everything about him in seconds. "Ren Thorne, and what makes you think my challenge is uninformed?" Mira gestured to the documents spread across his table. "Because you're reading the public protocols instead of the sealed precedent. Cases, because you're traveling on a freight hauler instead of building political support before you arrive. And because," she paused, studying his face, "because you have the look of someone who thinks passion and righteousness are sufficient substitutes for strategy." Ren felt his temper flare. "My mother has been unjustly exiled and branded as genetically unfit for research that could revolutionize interspecies relations. Excuse me if I think that warrants some passion." "Your mother is Nessa Thorne." Mira's expression shifted, surprise replacing her earlier condescension. "The xenobiologist who was exiled to Kalos 3. You know about her case." Mira sat down uninvited, her legal mind clearly engaged. "I know about the public version. Ethical violations, unsuitable methodology. The standard bureaucratic language they use when they want to bury someone quietly. But if you're here challenging her classification," she leaned forward, "what aren't the public records telling?" "U.S. Captain Jorah cleared his throat. "I'm going to check on the navigation systems and leave you to sort out whatever this is about." He left them alone in the lounge, and Ren found himself under the intense scrutiny of someone who clearly understood the legal system far better than he did. "Her research succeeded," Ren said finally. "She created stable genetic fusion between different species. The council exiled her not because her work was unethical, but because it threatened their power structure." Mira was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. That would explain why her case files are partially sealed, and why they're moving to classify her now, after all these years. She looked at his scattered documents again. "You're going about this all wrong. I'm open to suggestions. First, you need to understand that the council doesn't just rule on law, they rule on politics. Your mother's research threatens the fundamental assumptions that galactic society is built on: species separation, genetic purity, the impossibility of true interspecies integration. If you walk in there demanding justice, you'll be dismissed as an idealistic troublemaker." Ren felt frustrated. "So what do you suggest? That I just accept their decision?" "I suggest you fight smarter." Mira pulled out her own tablet and began accessing files. "There's a pattern in successful challenges to council rulings. They succeed when they're framed not as attacks on council authority, but as clarifications of existing law. When they're presented by advocates who understand the political landscape, when they're supported by precedent and procedure rather than emotional appeals. And you understand this political landscape." Mira's smile was complicated, carrying layers of meaning Ren was only beginning to grasp. "I'm half Altarian, raised on a human colony world, working in interspecies law. I've spent my entire career navigating the spaces between worlds, between peoples. If anyone understands the politics of not quite belonging anywhere, it's me." There was something in her voice, not quite bitterness, but a deep understanding of exclusion that resonated with Ren's own feelings about his mother's exile. "Why would you help me?" "Because," Mira said, her silver-flecked eyes meeting his, "your mother's research could change everything for people like me. People who exist in the gaps between species, who've been told their whole lives that they're anomalies rather than bridges." She paused. "And because someone needs to challenge the council's authority to decide who gets to love whom." The way she said that last part made Ren look at her more carefully. There was personal pain there, personal stakes that went beyond professional interest. "What do you get out of this?" he asked. "If we succeed, a legal precedent that could dismantle decades of discriminatory law. If we fail," she shrugged, "at least I'll know I tried to fight for something that matters instead of just processing routine." Legal challenges over the next few days as the Wandering Star continued its journey toward Nexus Prime. Ren found himself working closely with Mira to understand the complexities of his case. She was brilliant, he realized, able to see legal connections and political implications that would never have occurred to him. But she was also cautious to a degree that sometimes frustrated him. "You can't just demand they overturn the ruling," she explained during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "You have to give them a way to save face while doing the right thing, even when they're wrong. Especially when they're wrong. Pride makes people stupid, and stupid people in power make dangerous decisions." Despite their different approaches, Ren found himself drawn to Mira's quiet intensity, the way she could dissect complex legal arguments with surgical precision, while never losing sight of the human cost of injustice. And sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, he caught her watching him with an expression that suggested her interest in his case might not be purely professional. Captain Jorek found them in the lounge on their final night before reaching Nexus Prime, surrounded by legal documents and sharing what passed for coffee on a freight hauler. "You to make a good team," he observed. "Different strengths, but working toward the same goal." Mira glanced at Ren, something unspoken passing between them. "We'll find out soon enough." As Nexus Prime grew larger in the viewport, a glittering sprawl of towers and platforms that seemed to float impossibly in space, Ren felt both excitement and trepidation. He was no longer just a man seeking justice for his mother. He was part of something larger, more complex, and potentially more dangerous than he'd imagined. And somewhere in the growing connection between him and Mira, he sensed the beginning of something that might be as revolutionary as his mother's research. Nexus Prime's Grand Archive was a testament to galactic civilization, a crystalline spire that stretched impossibly high, its translucent walls filled with swirling data streams that looked like captured starlight. Ren stood at its base, craning his neck to see where it disappeared into the artificial atmosphere of the city's upper levels, feeling exactly as small as Captain Jorek had warned him he would. "Impressive, isn't it?" Mira said, though her tone suggested she was more focused on practical matters than architectural wonder. 3 million years of recorded galactic history, accessible through quantum-linked consciousness interfaces, assuming you can get permission to access the restricted sections. And can we? That's what we're here to find out. She led him through the entrance, where security scanners analyzed everything from their DNA to their stated research intentions. The lobby stretched out before them like a small city, with information kiosks staffed by beings from dozens of species, and holographic directories floating at various heights to accommodate different PHYSIOLOGIES. After 20 minutes of navigating bureaucracy, they found themselves in a transit pod ascending through the archive's core. Mira had somehow secured them an appointment with archive keeper Thalon, though she'd been mysteriously vague about how. "There's something you should know about Thalon," she said, as they rose through layers of data storage. "He's Valdoran, one of the longest-lived species in the galaxy. He's been working in these archives for over 300 years, and he remembers things the official records have forgotten. Things like my mother's real research, maybe. Valdorans have perfect memory retention, but they also have strict cultural codes about information sharing. We'll need to convince him that revealing what he knows serves a greater good." The pod stopped at a level marked only with symbols Ren didn't recognize. The doors opened onto a circular chamber lined with what looked like living crystal formations, each one pulsing softly with stored information. At the center sat a figure that seemed ancient even by galactic standards, tall, ethereally thin, with skin that had the translucent quality of aged parchment and eyes that held depths Ren couldn't begin to fathom. "Archive Keeper Thalon," Mira said, bowing slightly in what Ren assumed was appropriate protocol. "Thank you for agreeing to see us." Thalon's voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate from the crystal walls themselves. "Meridelian, Your message mentioned research into the Thorn classification. An interesting choice, given your own heritage. Ren felt Mira tense beside him, but her voice remained steady. You know about my background. Child, I've been cataloging the genetic records of every being who enters this archive. For longer than your species has had spaceflight. Your Altarian maternal lineage is as obvious to me as your human father's stubborn determination. Thalen's gaze shifted to Ren, which you seem to have inherited in full measure, young Thorn. You knew my mother, I knew her work. Thalen rose from his seat, moving with fluid grace toward one of the crystal formations. Nessa Thorn came here 24 years ago, seeking historical precedents for interspecies genetic compatibility. What she found, he touched the crystal, and suddenly the chamber filled with holographic displays showing complex genetic sequences. What she found was evidence that such compatibility was not only possible, but had occurred naturally throughout galactic history. Ren stared at the data streams flowing around them. The Council said her research was unprecedented. The Council said many things about your mother's research that were incomplete. Thalen's fingers danced across the crystal interface, calling up more files. Dr. Thorn discovered 17 documented cases of natural genetic fusion between different species dating back thousands of years. More importantly, she identified the specific catalytic factors that made such fusion possible. Mira leaned forward, her legal mind engaged. If there was historical precedent, why was her research considered controversial? Because, said a new voice from the chamber entrance, some people prefer convenient lies to inconvenient truths. Ren turned to see an elegant figure entering the chamber, humanoid in shape, but with the distinctive blue-tinged skin and elaborate facial markings of acetation. She wore the flowing robes that marked her as a council member, and her bearing suggested significant authority. Counselor Reef, Mira said, clearly surprised. I didn't know you would be joining us. Archive Keeper Thalen requested my presence when he learned the nature of your research. Reef moved to join them among the holographic displays. I was one of 3 council members who voted against your mother's exile. Mr. Thorn, we were outvoted. Why? Ren asked. If her research was historically supported, why exile her? Reef and Thalen exchanged a look that spoke of long understanding between old allies. Because, Reef said carefully, certain council members saw her work as a threat to the established order, species purity laws, territorial boundaries, trade restrictions. All of these depend on maintaining the fiction that different species are fundamentally incompatible. But my mother proved that was false. She proved more than that, Thalen interjected, manipulating the crystal interface to display a complex molecular diagram. She identified the genetic markers that predict successful fusion, and she developed techniques to artificially trigger the compatibility factors. In essence, she discovered how to make any two species compatible for genetic bonding. The implications hit Ren like a physical blow. They exiled her because she could have eliminated species barriers entirely. Precisely. Reef's expression was grim. And now, certain council members are moving to have her declared genetically unfit as a way of ensuring her research never sees the light of day. Mira had been unusually quiet during this exchange, but now she stepped closer to the genetic displays, studying them with intense concentration. These compatibility markers, she said slowly, they're not random, are they? Thalen's ancient eyes fixed on her with approval. Very perceptive. What do you see? I see myself. Mira's voice was barely above a whisper. The markers that indicate natural compatibility, I carry them. My mixed heritage isn't an anomaly. I'm proof that the barriers between species are artificial. Ren looked at her, seeing her with new understanding. You're living evidence that my mother's research was correct. More than that, Counselor Reef said. You both are, Mr. Thorn. Your genetic profile shows markers that suggest broad compatibility across multiple species. Ms. Delian's mixed heritage proves such compatibility can be stable and beneficial. Together, you represent everything certain council members are trying to suppress. The chamber fell silent as the weight of this revelation settled over them. Ren found himself looking at Mira not just as an ally in his fight for justice, but as someone who understood what it meant to exist in the spaces between accepted categories. There's something else, Thalen said, calling up a new set of files. Your mother's research suggested that genetic compatibility was often accompanied by emotional and psychological bonding. That successful fusion required not just biological compatibility, but genuine connection between the individuals involved. Ren felt his pulse quicken as he caught Mira's eye. The growing attraction between them suddenly took on new significance. You mean, Mira said carefully, that the feelings developing between compatible individuals might be enhanced by their genetic compatibility? I mean, Thalen replied with something that might have been amusement, that your mother's research suggests love might be more than mere emotion. It might be a biological imperative for species evolution. Counselor Reef stepped forward, which is why we need to move quickly. Minister Vask is planning to present your mother's classification to the full council next week. If it passes, her research will be buried permanently, and anyone attempting to continue her work will face severe penalties. What do you need from U.S.? Ren asked. Present your case before the classification hearing. Use Thalen's historical research to demonstrate precedent. Use Ms. Delian's heritage and legal expertise to challenge the constitutional basis of the classification process. Reef paused. And use the growing bond between you to prove that your mother's theories about love and compatibility are more than just scientific speculation. As they prepared to leave the archive, Ren found himself walking closer to Mira, their hands occasionally brushing as they navigated the corridors. Each contact sent small sparks of connection through him, and he could see in her silver-flecked eyes that she felt it too. This is bigger than just your mother now, she said quietly. If we succeed, we could change the fundamental nature of how species interact across the galaxy. And if we fail, Mira's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. Then, at least we'll fail together, looking at their joined hands, human and half-Altarian. Living proof of what was possible. Ren felt something settle into place. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about love, connection, and the future of relationships across the stars. The hearing that would determine everything was only days away. The council chamber was designed to intimidate, and it succeeded spectacularly. Ren stood at the petitioner's podium, looking up at the curved amphitheater where representatives from 47 species sat in judgment. The chamber's acoustics meant that every whisper, every shuffle of robes, every click of alien anatomy echoed with crystalline clarity. Above it all, High Arbiter Corwin presided from the elevated central position, his ancient features carved from what looked like living stone. The petition before us today, Corwin's voice resonated through the chamber with the weight of centuries, concerns the classification status of Dr. Nessa Thorne, currently designated as genetically unfit for interspecies contact. The petitioner, her son Ren Thorne, claims this designation is unjust and seeks its reversal. Beside Ren, Mira adjusted her formal advocate's robe's deep blue fabric that caught the chamber's ethereal lighting and made her silver-flecked eyes seem to glow. They'd spent the previous night in intense preparation, their strategy sessions extending until dawn as they refined their arguments and tried to anticipate every possible objection. Before we proceed, announced a voice from the council's left wing, I must raise a procedural concern. Minister Vask rose from his seat, a tall, imposing figure whose species Ren didn't recognize, but whose predatory bearing was unmistakable. His skin had a metallic sheen, and his eyes were flat black, reflecting nothing the petitioner lacks. Standing to challenge this classification, Vask continued, as the son of a classified individual, his own genetic status is questionable. Furthermore, his choice of advocate a mixed heritage individual of dubious legal authority suggests this petition is nothing more than an emotional outburst rather than a legitimate legal challenge. Ren felt anger flare at the casual dismissal of both his rights and Mira's qualifications. But Mira's hand touched his arm in gentle warning. They'd expected this. If I may address the minister's concerns, Mira said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. The petitioner's standing is established under Section 7 of the Galactic Justice Protocols, which grants family members the right to challenge classifications that affect fundamental freedoms. As for my qualifications, she gestured, and holographic, Displays materialized showing her credentials. I am fully certified in interspecies law by the Nexus Prime Legal Academy, with specializations in constitutional challenges and genetic rights legislation. Credentials issued by institutions that may themselves be biased toward mixed heritage individuals. Vask countered smoothly. High Arbiter Corwin raised one massive hand for silence. The procedural concerns are noted but overruled. The petition will proceed. Mr. Thorne, present your case. Wren stepped forward, his heart pounding. Everything they'd worked for came down to this moment. Honored council members, 23 years ago, you made a decision based on incomplete information. My mother was exiled not because her research was unethical, but because it threatened assumptions about the impossibility of true interspecies connection. He gestured, and the first of their prepared evidence displays appeared. Thalen's historical research showing documented cases of natural genetic fusion throughout galactic history. Archive Keeper Thalen's research proves that interspecies compatibility is not only possible, but has occurred naturally for millennia. My mother's work didn't violate natural law, it revealed natural possibilities that had been systematically suppressed. Minister Vask stood again. Even if we accept these dubious historical claims, the fact remains that Dr. Thorne's research was conducted without proper authorization and posed significant risks to galactic stability. What risks? Mira interjected, her legal training taking over. The risk that species might choose to connect rather than remain isolated. The risk that artificial barriers might be revealed as political constructs rather than biological necessities. The chamber erupted in murmurs from various species representatives. Wren could see they were striking sensitive political nerves. High Arbiter Corwin's voice cut through the noise. The petitioners will confine themselves to legal arguments rather than political speculation. With respect, Honored Arbiter, Mira replied, this case is fundamentally about the legal authority of the Council to classify individuals. Based on scientific research that challenges political assumptions, we request permission to present testimony from Dr. Thorne herself. A new murmur ran through the chamber. Minister Vask's expression darkened. The classified individual is prohibited from participating in council proceedings. She is prohibited from physical presence and from communicating with non-human species, Mira corrected. However, she is not prohibited from providing testimony in defense of her own classification status. Corwin considered this. The request is irregular, but not explicitly prohibited. Very well, present your witness. The chamber's central projection system activated, and suddenly Nessa Thorne appeared as a full-scale hologram. Wren felt his breath catch. He hadn't seen his mother in over 2 years, and she looked older, more worn by her isolation. But her eyes still held the passionate intelligence he remembered from childhood. Dr. Thorne, Mira began. Please describe for the Council the nature of your research on Kalos 3. I studied interspecies genetic compatibility, Nessa replied, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Specifically, the biological mechanisms that allow for stable genetic fusion between different species. What I discovered was that compatibility is far more common than previously believed, and that successful fusion requires not just biological compatibility, but emotional bonding between the individuals involved. And did your research yield practical results? Yes. I successfully created stable genetic fusions in laboratory conditions, and I identified the specific catalytic factors that predict successful bonding in living subjects. Minister Vask rose abruptly. This testimony is irrelevant to the classification hearing. Dr. Thorne's research methodology violated established protocols regardless of her results. Actually, said a new voice from the gallery, her methodology was not only sound but revolutionary. Every head in the chamber turned as Counselor Reef stood, her formal robes identifying her as a recognized council member with the right to present evidence. I have here, Reef continued, producing a data crystal, the complete, unedited record of Dr. Thorne's research approval process, including communications that were not part of the original hearing. High Arbiter Corwin's ancient features shifted into what might have been surprise. Counselor Reef, you are presenting previously sealed evidence. I am presenting evidence that was improperly sealed, Reef replied. Evidence that shows Dr. Thorne's research was not only approved by the proper authorities, but was actively suppressed because of its political implications. The data crystal activated, filling the chamber with holographic documents. Ren watched in amazement as communications between council members revealed the truth. His mother's research had been deliberately sabotaged not because it was dangerous, but because it was successful. As you can see, Reef announced, Minister Vask himself authorized the suppression of Dr. Thorne's research after receiving pressure from species representatives who feared the political ramifications of proven interspecies compatibility. The chamber exploded into chaos. Representatives shouted accusations across species lines while Minister Vask's supporters tried to discredit the evidence. Through it all, Ren felt Mira's hand find his, their connection anchoring him in the storm of political revelation. Furthermore, Reef continued when order was restored. I present as evidence the petitioner and his advocate themselves. Their growing emotional bond, combined with their genetic compatibility markers, proves that Dr. Thorne's theories about love and connection transcending species barriers are not merely scientific speculation, but observable reality. It's not over, she whispered to him as they held each other. This is just the beginning. Looking around the chamber, seeing representatives from dozens of species talking animatedly about the implications of what they'd witnessed, Ren realized she was right. They hadn't just won a legal case, they'd opened a door to a new future for the galaxy, and they'd found each other in the process.